Plague by Albert Camus. Part 2. When leaving his surgery on the morning of the 16th of April, Dr. Bernard Rio felt something soft under his foot. It was a dead rat lying in the middle of the landing. In the spur of the moment, he kicked it to one side and, without giving it further thought, continued on his way downstairs. Only when he was stepping forth into the street did it occur to him that a dead rat had no business to be on his landing, and he turned back to ask the door porter of the building to see to its removal. It was not until he noticed old Monsieur Michel's reaction to the news that he realized the peculiar nature of his discovery. Personally, he had thought the presence of the dead rat rather odd. No more than that. The door porter, however, was genuinely outraged. On one point, he was categorically, "There were no rats here!" In vain, the doctor assured him that there was a rat, presumably dead, on the first-floor landing. Monsieur Michel's conviction wasn't to be shaken. "There weren't no rats in the building," he repeated. "So someone must have brought this one from outside, some youngster trying to be funny, most likely." That evening, when Dr. Rio was standing in the entrance, feeling for the latchkey in his pocket before starting up the stairs to his flat, he saw a big rat coming towards him from the dark end of the passage. It moved uncertainly, and its fur was sopping wet. The animal stopped and seemed to be trying to get its balance, moved forward again towards the doctor, halted again, then spun round on itself with a little squeal and fell on its side. Its mouth was slightly open and blood was splurting from it. After gazing at it for a moment, the doctor went upstairs. He wasn't thinking about the rat. That glimpse of spurting blood had switched his thoughts back to something that had been on his mind all day. His wife, who had been ill for a year now, was due to leave next day for a sanatorium in the mountains. He found her lying down in the bedroom, resting as he had asked her to do, in view of the exhausting journey before her. She gave him a little smile.
"You know, I'm feeling ever so much better."
The doctor gazed down at the face that turned towards him. In the glow of the bedside lamp, his wife of 30, and the long illness had left its mark on her face, yet the thought that came to Ruro's mind as he gazed at her was how young she looked, almost like a little girl. But perhaps that was because of the smile which effaced all else. "Now, try to sleep," he counselled. "The nurse is coming at 11, you know, and you have to catch the midday train." He kissed the slightly moist forehead. The smile escorted him to the door. Next day, the 17th of April, at 8 o'clock, the porter buttonholed the doctor as he was going out. Some young scallywags, he said, had dumped 3 dead rats in the hallway. They'd obviously been caught in traps with very strong springs, as they were bleeding profusely. The doctor had lingered for the porter in the doorway for quite a while, holding the rats by their legs and keeping a sharp eye on the passers-by. On the off chance that the miscreants would give themselves away by grinning or something, or by some facetious remark. His watch had been in vain, of course. "But I'll nab them, all right," said Monsieur Michel hopefully. Much puzzled, Rio decided to begin his round in the outskirts of the town, where his poorer patients lived. Scavenging in these districts was done late in the morning, and as he drove his car along the straight, dusty streets, he glanced at the garbage bins aligned along the pavement's edge. In one street alone, the doctor counted as many as a dozen rats deposited on the vegetable and other refuse in the bins. He found his first patient, an asthma case of long standing in bed, in a room which served both as dining room and bedroom and overlooked the street. The invalid was an old Spaniard with a hard, rugged face. Placed on the coverlet in front of him were 2 cooking pots containing dried peas. When the doctor entered, the old man was sitting up, bending his neck back, gasping and wheezing in his efforts to recover his breath. His wife brought a bowl of water. "Well, doctor," he said while the injection was being made, "they're coming out good and proper, have you noticed?"
The rats, he means, his wife explained. The man next door found free, his doorstep.
Hey, they're coming out. You can see them in the dustbins by dozens. It's hunger, that's what it is, driving them out.
Rua soon discovered that the rats were the great topic of conversation in that part of the town. After his round of visits, he drove home. "There's a telegram for you, sir, upstairs," Monsieur Michel informed him. The doctor asked him if he'd seen any more rats. "No," the porter replied. "There ain't been no more. I'm keeping a sharp lookout, you know. Those youngsters wouldn't dare, not when I'm about." The telegram informed Rio that his mother would be arriving next day. She was going to keep house for her son during his wife's absence. When the doctor entered his flat, he found the nurse already there. He looked at his wife. She was in a tailor-made suit, and he noticed that she had used some colour. He smiled to her. "That's splendid," he said. "You're looking very nice." A few minutes later, he was seeing her into the sleeping car. She glanced round the compartment.
It's too dear for us, really, isn't it?
"Don't worry about that," Rio replied. "It had to be done."
Say, what's this story about rats that's going around?
"I can't explain it. It certainly is queer, but it'll pass." Then, hurriedly, he begged her to forgive him. He felt he should have looked after her better. He'd been most remiss. When she shook her head, as if to stop him, he added, "Anyhow, once you're back, everything will be better, right? We'll make a fresh start, you and I, dear."
That's it.
Her eyes were sparkling.
Let's make a fresh start.
But then she turned her head and seemed to be gazing through the carriage window at the people on the platform, jostling each other in their haste. The hissing of the locomotives reached their ears. Gently, he called his wife. His wife's first name. When she looked round, he saw her face, wet with tears. "Don't," he murmured. Behind the tears, the smile returned. A little tense, she drew a deep breath. "Now, off you go. Everything will be quite all right." He took her in his arms and stepped back onto the platform. Now he could only see her smile across the window. "Please, dear," he said, "take great care of yourself." She could not hear him now. But he was leaving the platform. Near the exit, he met Monsieur Offon, the police magistrate, holding his small boy by the hand. The doctor asked him if he was going away. Tall and dark, Monsieur Offon had something of the air of what used to be called a man of the world, and something of an undertaker's mute. "No," the magistrate replied. "I've come to meet Madame Offon, who's been to present her respects to my family." The engine whistled. "Shh. These rats now," the magistrate began. Rua made a brief movement in the direction of the train, then turned back towards the exit. "The rats," he said. "It's nothing." The only impression of that moment, which afterwards he would recall, was the passing of a railwayman with a box full of dead rats under his arm. Early in the morning, and then later into the afternoon that day, when his consultations were beginning and ending as well, a young man happened to call by. The doctor gathered that he had called before in the morning and was a journalist by profession. His name was Ramon Rabeur. Short, square-shouldered, with a determined looking face and keen, intelligent eyes, he gave the impression of someone who could keep his end up in any circumstances. He affected a sporting type of dress. He came straight to the point. His newspaper, one of the leading Paris dailies, had commissioned him to make a report on the living conditions prevailing amongst the Arab population, and especially on the sanitation and sanitary conditions, as it were. Rua replied that these conditions were not very good, but because, and before he said any more, he wanted to know if the journalist would be allowed to tell the truth for once. "Certainly I shall," Rabeur replied. I mean, Rua explained, would you be allowed to publish an unqualified condemnation of the present state of things? Unqualified? Well, I must own I couldn't go that far, but surely things aren't quite so bad as that. No, Rua said quietly. They weren't so bad as that. He had put the question solely to find out if Robert could or couldn't state the facts without paltering with the truth. I've, to be honest, no use for statements in which something is kept back, he added. And that is why I shall not furnish information in support of yours. The journalist smiled. You taught the language of St. Just. Without raising his voice, Rua said he knew nothing about that. The language he used was that of a man who was sick and tired of the world he lived in, though he had much liking for his fellow men, and had resolved, for his part, to have no truck with injustice and compromises with the truth. His shoulders hunched. Robert gazed at the doctor for some moments without speaking. Then, I think I understand you, he said, getting up from the chair. The doctor accompanied him to the door. It's good of you to take it like that, he said. Yes, I understand, Robert repeated. With what seemed a hint of impatience in his voice. Sorry to have troubled you. And shaking hands with him, Rua suggested that if he was out for curious stories for his paper, he might say something about the extraordinary number of dead rats that were being found in the town just now. Ah, Robert exclaimed. That certainly interests me. On his way out at 5 for another round of visits, the doctor passed on the staircase a stocky, youngish man with a big, deeply furrowed face and bushy eyebrows. He had met him once or twice in the top-floor flat, which was occupied by some male Spanish dancers. Puffing a cigarette, John Theroux was gazing down at the convulsions of a rat dying on the step in front of him. He looked up, and his grey eyes remained fixed on the doctor for some moments. Then, after wishing him good day, he remarked that it was rather odd, the way all these rats were coming out of their holes to die. Very odd, Rua agreed. And it ends up by getting on one's nerves, no? In a way, Doctor, only in a way. We've not seen anything of this sort before. That's all. Personally, I find it interesting, yes, definitely interesting. Theroux ran his fingers through his hair to brush it off his forehead, looked again at the rat that had now stopped moving, then smiled towards Rua. But Doctor, but really, it's the porter's headache now, isn't it? And it so happened the porter was the next person Rua encountered. He was leaning against the wall beside the street door. He was looking tired, and his normally rubicund face had lost its color. Yes, I know, the old man told Rua, who had informed him of the latest casualty among the rats. I keep finding them by twos and threes, but it's the same thing in the other houses in the street. He seemed depressed and worried and was scratching his neck absent-mindedly. Rua asked him how he felt. The porter wouldn't go so far as to say he was feeling ill. Still, he wasn't quite up to the mark. In his opinion, it was just due to worry. These damned rats had given him a shock like. It would be a relief when they stopped coming out and dying all over the place. Next morning, it was April the 18th. When the doctor was bringing back his mother from the station, he found Monsieur Michel looking still more out of sorts. The staircase from the cellar to the attics was strewn with dead rats. 10 or a dozen of them. The garbage bins of all the houses in the street were full of rats. The doctor's mother took it quite calmly.
"It's like that sometimes,"
she said vaguely. She was a small woman with silver hair and dark, gentle eyes.
"I'm so glad to be with you again, Bernard," she added. "The rats can't change that anyhow."
He nodded. It was a fact that everything seemed easy when she was there. However, he rang up the municipal office. He knew the man in charge of the department concerned with the extermination of vermin, and he asked him if he'd heard about all the rats that were coming out to die in the open. Yes, Mercier knew all about it. In fact, 50 rats had been found in his offices, which were near the harbour. To tell the truth, he was rather perturbed. Did the doctor think it meant anything serious? Riwer couldn't give a definite opinion, but he thought the sanitary service should take action of some kind. Mercier agreed.
And if you think it's really worth the trouble, I'll get an order issued as well.
It certainly is worth the trouble, Riwer replied. His charwoman had just told him that several hundred dead rats had been collected in the big factory where her husband worked. It was about this time that our townsfolk began to show signs of uneasiness, for from the 18th of April onwards, quantities of dead or dying rats were found in factories and warehouses. In some cases, the animals were killed to put an end to their agony. From the outer suburbs to the centre of the town, in all of the byways where the doctor's duties took him, in every thoroughfare, rats were piled up in garbage bins or lying in long lines in the gutters. The evening papers that took up the matter and inquired whether or not the city fathers were going to take steps and what emergency measures were contemplated to abate this particularly disgusting nuisance. Actually, the municipality had not contemplated doing anything at all, but now a meeting was convened to discuss the situation. An order was transmitted to the sanitary service to collect the dead rats at daybreak every morning. When the rats had been collected, 2 municipal vans were to take them to be burned in the town incinerator. But the situation worsened in the following day. There were more and more dead vermin in the streets, and the scavengers had bigger van loads every morning. On the 4th day, the rats began to come out and die in batches. From basements, cellars, and sewers, they emerged in long, wavering files into the light of day, swayed helplessly, then did a sort of pirouette and fell dead at the feet of the horrified onlookers. At night, in passages and alleyways, their shrill, little death cries could be clearly heard. In the morning, the bodies were found lying in the gutters, each with a gout of blood like a red flower on its tapering muzzle. Some were bloated and already beginning to rot, others rigid with their whiskers still erect. Even in the busy heart of the town, you found them piled in little heaps on landings and in backyards. Some stole forth to die singly in the halls of public offices, school playgrounds, and even on cafe terraces. Our townsfolk were amazed to find such busy centres as the Place d'Armes, the boulevards, the Strand, dotted with repulsive little corpses. After the daily clean-up of the town, which took place at sunrise, there was a brief respite. Then gradually the rats began to appear again in numbers. It went on increasing throughout the day. People out at night would often feel underfoot the squelchy roundness of a still warm body. It was as if the earth on which our houses stood were being purged of its secreted humours, thrusting up to the surface the abscesses and pus clots that had been forming in its entrails. You must picture the consternation of our little town. Hitherto so tranquil, and now, out of the blue, shaken to its core like a quite healthy man, who all of a sudden feels his temperature shoot up and the blood seething like wildfire in his veins. Things went so far that the Ranstock Information Bureau, inquiries on all subjects promptly and accurately answered, which ran a free information talk on the wireless, by way of publicity, began its talks by announcing that no less than 6,231 rats had been collected and burnt in a single day. On the 25th of April, giving as it did an ampler, more precise view of the scene daily enacted before our eyes, this amazing figure administered a jolt to the public nerves. If at all people had merely grumbled at a stupid, rather obnoxious visitation, they now realized that this strange phenomenon, whose scope could not be measured and whose origins escaped detection, had something vaguely menacing about it. Only the old Spaniard, whom Dr. Ruan was treating for asthma, went on rubbing his hands and chuckling.
They're coming out! They're coming out!
With senile glee. On the 28th of April, when the Ranstock Bureau announced that 8,000 rats had been collected, a wave of something like panic swept across the town. There was a demand for drastic measures. The authorities were accused of slackness, and people who had houses on the coast spoke of moving there. Early in the year, though it was. But the next day, the Bureau informed them that the phenomenon had abruptly ended, and the sanitary service had collected only a trifling number of rats, and everyone breathed more freely. It was, however, on this same day at noon that Dr. Rion, when parking his car in front of the block of flats where he lived, noticed the door porter coming towards him from the end of the street. He was dragging himself along, his head bent, arms and legs curiously splayed out with the jerky movements of a clockwork doll. The old man was leaning on the arm of a priest, whom the doctor knew. It was Father Paniluz, a learned and militant Jesuit, whom he had met occasionally, and who was very highly thought of in our town, even in circles quite indifferent to religion. Ruel sat in his car, waiting for the two men to draw level with him. He noticed that Monsieur Michel's eyes were fever bright, and he was breathing wheezily. The old man explained that, feeling a bit off color, he had gone out to take the air, but he had started feeling pains in all sorts of places, in his neck, armpits, and groin, and had been obliged to turn back and ask Father Paniluz to give him an arm. "It's just swellings, but they hurt cruel," he said. "I must have strained myself somehow." Leaning out of the window of the car, the doctor ran his hand over the base of Michel's neck. A hard lump, like a knot in wood, had formed there. "Go back. Go to bed at once and take your temperature. I'll come to see you this afternoon." When the old man had gone, Ruel asked Father Paniluz what he made of this queer business about the rats.
"Oh, I suppose it's an epidemic they've been having."
Father's eyes were smiling behind his big round glasses, while Ruel was reading for the second time the telegram his wife had sent him from the sanitarium. Announcing her arrival, the phone rang. It was one of his former patients, a clerk in the municipal office, ringing him up. He had suffered for a long time from a constriction of the aorta, and as he was poor, Ruel had charged no fee.
"Thanks, Doctor, for remembering me. But this time it's somebody else. The man next door has had an accident. Please come at once, it's urgent."
He sounded out of breath. Ruel thought quickly. Yes, he could see the porter afterwards. A few minutes later, he was entering a small house in the Rue Ferrabier, on the outskirts of the town. Halfway up the drafty, foul-smelling stairs, he saw Joseph Grant, the municipal clerk,
Hurrying down to meet him, he was a man of about 50 years of age, tall and drooping, with narrow shoulders, thin limbs, and a yellowish moustache.
He looks better now,
he told Rua.
but I really thought his number was up.
He blew his nose vigorously. On the top floor, the second, Rua noticed something scrawled in red chalk on a door on the left. "Come in, I've hanged myself," it read. They entered the room. A rope dangled from a hanging lamp above a chair lying on its side. The dining room table had been pushed into a corner, but the rope hung empty.
I got him down just in time.
Grant seemed always to have trouble in finding his words, though he expressed himself in the simplest possible way.
I was going out, and I heard a noise. When I saw that writing on the wall, I thought it was a leg pull. Only then I heard a funny sort of groan. It made my blood run cold, you know? As they say.
He scratched his head.
That must have been a painful way of doing it, I should think. So naturally, I went in.
Grant had opened the door, and they were standing on the threshold of a bright but scantily furnished bedroom. There was a brass bedstead against one of the walls, and a plump little man was lying there, breathing heavily. He gazed at them with bloodshot eyes. Abruptly, Rua stopped short. In the intervals of the man's breathing, he seemed to hear the little squeals of rats. But he couldn't see anything moving in the corners of the room. Then he went to the bedside. Evidently, the man had not fallen from a sufficient height or very quickly for the collarbone to have snapped, so it held. Naturally, there was some asphyxia. An X-ray photograph would be needed. Meanwhile, the doctor gave him a camphor injection and assured him he would be all right in a few days. "Thank you, doctor," the man mumbled. When Rua asked Grant if he had notified the police, he hung his head.
Well, as a matter of fact, I haven't. The first time I thought was too.
"Quite so." Rua cut in. "I'll see to it." But the invalid made a fretful gesture and sat up in bed. He felt much better, he explained. Really, it wasn't worth the trouble. "Don't be alarmed," Rua said. "It's little more than a formality. Anyway, I have no option. I have to report this to the police." "Oh!" The man slumped back on the bed and started sobbing weakly. Grant, who had been twiddling his moustache while they were speaking, went up to the bed.
Come on, Monsieur Courtauld. Try to understand. People could say the doctor was to blame if you took it into your head to have another shot at it.
Courtauld assured him tearfully that there wasn't the least risk of that. He'd had a sort of crazy fit, but it had passed, and all he wanted now was to be left in peace. Rua was writing a prescription. "Very well," he said. "We'll say no more about it for the present. I'll come and see you again in a day or two. But mind you, don't do anything silly, please." On the landing, he told Grant that he was obliged to make a report, but would ask the police inspector to hold up the inquiry for at least a couple of days. "But somebody should watch Courtauld tonight," he added. "Has he any relations?"
No, that I know of. Not anybody, but I can very well stay with him, I suppose. I can't say I really know the man, but one's got to help a neighbor sometime, you know?
As he walked down the stairs, Rua caught himself glancing into the dark corners, and he asked Grant if the rats had quite disappeared in his part of the town. Grant had no idea. True, he'd heard some talk about rats, but he'd never paid much attention to gossip like that.
I've other things to think about, you know,
he added. Rua, who was in a hurry to get away, was already shaking his hand. There was a letter to write to his wife, and he wanted to see the porter first. Newspaper vendors were shouting the latest news, that the rats had disappeared. But Rua found his patient leaning over the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to his belly and the other to his neck, vomiting pinkish bile into a slop pail. After retching for some moments, the man lay back again, gasping. His temperature was 103 Fahrenheit. The ganglions of his neck and limbs were swollen. The 2 black patches were developing on his thighs. He now complained of internal pains. "It's like fire!" he whimpered. "The bastard's burning me inside!" He could hardly get the words through his fever-crusted lips, and he gazed at the doctor with bulging eyes that his headache had suffused with tears. His wife cast an anxious look at Rohan, who said nothing. "Please, doctor, what is it?" "It might be almost anything. There's nothing definite as yet. Keep him on a light diet and give him plenty to drink." The sick man had been complaining of a raging thirst. On return to his flat, Rouer rang up his colleague Richard, one of the leading practitioners in the town. "No," Richard said, "I can't say I've noticed anything exceptional. No cases of fever with local inflammation. Wait a minute. Wait a sec. Wait a bit. I have 2 cases with inflamed glands. Abnormally so." "Well," Richard said, "that depends on what you mean by normal, doesn't it?" Anyhow, that night the porter was running a temperature of 104 Fahrenheit and in delirium, always babbling about "dim rats." Tried a fixation abscess. When he felt the sting of the turpentine, the old man yelled, "The bastards!" The glands had become still larger and felt like lumps of solid fibrous matter embedded in the flesh. Monsieur Michel had completely broken down. "Sit up with him," the doctor said, "and call me if necessary." Next day, the 30th of April, the sky was blue and slightly misty. A warm, gentle breeze was blowing, bringing with it a smell of flowers from the outlying suburbs. The morning noises of the streets sounded louder, gayer than usual. For everyone in our little town this day brought the promise of a new lease of life. Now that the shadow of fear under which they had been living for a week had lifted, Rewa, too, was in an optimistic mood. When he went down to see the door porter, he had been cheered up by a letter from his wife that had come with the first post. Old Michel's temperature had gone down to 99 Fahrenheit, and though he still looked very weak, he was smiling away. "He's better, doctor, isn't he?" his wife inquired. "Well, it's a bit too early to say, but keep your hopes up." At noon, the sick man's temperature shot up abruptly to 104. He was in constant delirium and had started vomiting again. The glands in the neck were painful to the touch, and the old man seemed to be straining to hold his head as far as possible from his body. His wife sat at the bottom of the bed, her hands on the counterpane, gently clasping his feet. She gazed at Rouen imploringly. "Listen," he said. "We'll have to move into hospital and try a special treatment. I'll ring up for the ambulance." 2 hours later, the doctor and Monsieur Michel were in the ambulance, bending over the sick man. Rambling words were issuing from the gaping mouth, thickly coated now with swords. I think it's sores, you know. He kept on repeating, "Them rats! Them blasted rats!" His face had gone livid, a greyish green. His lips were bloodless. His breath came in sudden gasps. His limbs spread out by the ganglions embedded in the berth, as if he were trying to bury himself in it, or a voice from the depths of the earth was summoning him below. The unhappy man seemed to be stifling under some unseen pressure. His wife was sobbing. "Isn't there any hope left, Doctor?